Hello and welcome back to the Friday Review, and today I am reviewing the debut full-length album from a Swedish heavy metal band that is Starscape, and the album is titled Colony, which was released though independently and digitally on March 1st, and then finally on March 5th it was given a physical release on CD through Stormspell Records. So, Starscape. Again, they are Swedish. They are from at least the town, or at least the city of Östersund, Jutland. Hope I all pronounced that correctly. Sweden, and they were formed in 2015, and it is a two-piece band. Yes, only two members, and that is, for most of the instruments, Anton Eriksson, and then for vocals here is Per Olaf Granson. So there's the two guys there, and they released their very first demo in 2017, and it was just, again, it's just titled Demo. And then in 2020, they released the very first EP titled Pilgrims, and then somewhere earlier this year, they then released Not Built by Human Hands as their very first single, and then here we are with their very first full-length album, Colony. So without further ado, let me get into my thoughts on Colony from Starscape. Okay, so before I really get into any of my thoughts on this release or this album, I'm going to be doing a track listing rundown. And so, the track listing here is about 7 songs, and it all clocks in at 43 minutes and 36 seconds. So these 7 songs are Pilgrims of the Stars, Interstellar, the title track, A New World, Not Built by Human Hands, Structure, and then finally Towards the Unknown. So there's your 7 songs, and where do I really begin with wrapping some of this album around my head? And the thing is, I've always wanted to kind of give my thoughts on this ever since this was ever uploaded onto the NBOTHM Full Albums channel on YouTube. And it was also reading the comments for some of this. I think I also might have heard some of the comments on the Facebook page or somewhere. I think it was posted. I forgot who did. I think it was a friend of mine maybe that might have posted it. But there was a lot of really polarizing comments towards this one. And it was mostly towards the vocalist. And I'll try and briefly run through the singer here. But I definitely want to get through at least some of the music, at least the overall musical feel of the album, and the sort of the structuring, the whole entire concept. Because there is a concept, even in its writing. It definitely seems to be a story concept about, again, since their the lyrical content is more science fiction. They definitely seem to really, they really go all into that, and a lot of that seems to really deal with either pilgrims going to outer space or some sort of trip that they can come up with. Obviously, it's also either inspired by old fantasy books from the 1960s or 70s, but at the same time, you can't also help but think of whatever sort of crazy psychedelic sort of person would have came up with back in the 1960s or early 70s in terms of some of the just wild stuff that they would read and just would. And so that's the sort of feel I get from this. But the thing is, that's all of my guessing. Because again, I can't really find what's the real story behind some of these songs, but it seems to be more of it's very much a concept album, I guess. So it has something to do with pilgrims in outer space, or them finding a new home, I guess, on another planet. I guess that really seems to be what I can gather from here. Musically, though, these guys really tend to really go into sort of the other dimension when it comes to just coming up with their overall writing style and the way they're just constructing and just coming up with all of their songs and the way the whole atmosphere of the album. I mean, it's definitely Swedish metal, but they really tend to really add in or take some inspiration from a lot of spacey at times. Maybe I don't know if I want to go out on a limb and say Hawkwind, but I wouldn't put past by me that they might have been influenced a little bit by Hawkwind in terms of just the overall spacey vibe of, at least, especially with the very first track, Pilgrims of the Stars, where it begins with this sort of almost very spacey, just almost, again, a very 1980s or mid 70s sort of spacey atmospheric sounds with the beepings and whatnot. And then finally breaking into this sort of straight up galloping metal track. And then as it goes further, we then almost get some sounds like the Hammond organ, which some of there is a lot of Hammond organ instruments being played through some of these songs, which kind of gives it to sort of that Deep Purple / Uriah Heep feel going on. I mean, it's very proggy, and there's a little bit of a progressive rock element to this album, but they have a way of just fusing it with the sort of straight galloping sort of new wave of British heavy metal / just Swedish heavy metal sound and into it that just makes it very unique sounding. Alright, they're definitely trying something different here. They definitely have some really interesting ideas for sure, and this, again, for a debut full-length album, they're really giving the listener what they are at least are up to, what their ideas are. They're giving them a good idea. I know what to expect and if they were to continue further, but I know this is usually stuff I will use for the closing bit of my review here, but I definitely want to get some of this in. But it's really interesting. Again, it is a very good opening track. As it goes, again, Interstellar is a good song too. It definitely keeps the pace up, it being more consistent, but I don't know if I can say it's one of my favorite tracks on the album, but it's okay. The title track is where I think stuff becomes good. Again, it begins very galloping, but as it kind of goes along, it does kind of give it a bit of a Uriah Heep sort of beat to it. Again, that sort of almost very mid-paced beat, and it just has a nice groove to it. I like it. So probably my favorite of some of the songs here. It's really a standout track. So the title track to me is a great one. A New World is really interesting. The way it begins, I wouldn't say ballad, but for some reason reminds me of one of the more, I don't want to go Blaze Bayley era Iron Maiden, but it has that sort of feel. The way it begins is sort of where it's kind of moody, kind of almost, it's in the way some of those songs would begin, especially on like Virtual 11. Or I mean Virtual XI, but it's Virtual 11. But that album, one of those songs, there's a little bit of that going on, or even some of the more, again, just the more melodic, more, I wouldn't say, again, it's not ballad, but the way that some of those the more slower Iron Maiden songs from even Bruce Dickinson later on, the way those begin. This is the way I get, just the overall vibe I'm getting from A New World, the way it begins here. It just has a modern Iron Maiden feel, but as it goes on, it then starts to go to blend in that sort of Uriah Heep influence. So it's like a cross between modern Iron Maiden and Uriah Heep. So it's a really interesting combination, and it definitely is a very cool track. I do like it. Then, of course, one of my absolute favorite tracks off this one has to be Not Built by Human Hands. This was the first single to be released for this album, and it is just a straight-up rocker. It does, again, it's still very much like a more metal Uriah Heep, or just new wave of British heavy metal feel in some of its ways, but it's so good. It's actually, again, up with the title track. It's one of my favorites. Structures is good, too. It's an instrumental. Again, I wouldn't say it's trying to sound like one of the more instrumental tracks from Iron Maiden, but it kind of goes for some of that again, but with the adding of that sort of organ or Hammond organ instrument, it just ends up making it real cool sounding, and I do like it. Finally, the very last track, Towards the Unknown. This one is straight up prog. This is straight up fucking prog right here, the way it just begins and the overall, again, with the sort of real, just moody Hammond organ sound. They really were definitely listening to a lot of the sort of classic heavy prog bands from the early 70s. I mean, even including in Deep Purple and Uriah Heep. Just all of that. They're really listening to how some of it, they really would go with some of their songs. You really hear that. And the way the track goes along, and the sort of the way it changes riffs and pacings and the overall beats. This is definitely a lot more on the prog side of things. Again, and I would say progressive metal, but if it was Swedish or classic Swedish progressive metal, if it was ever a thing, it just has that. It's great. So it's a really interesting way to end the album, but it's a good way to end the album. So that's pretty much where I am. Alright, I'm going to briefly then run in through here, because since I've talked about how I like the structure and some of it, since I kind of alluded to the fact on that there's some negativity towards some of this album, a lot of, at least from at least the people who commented on the video, or at least what the new wave or traditional heavy metal full-length albums channel on YouTube released. A lot of people seem to really be negative towards the singer in the band. I've seen some people say, "Oh, geez, he sounds like a almost emo style singer. He sounds like a freaking almost like Linkin Park or whatnot." You know, everyone is going for these harsh sort of comparisons and say he ruins the fucking songs. I be quite honest, I think those are a lot of over exaggerated and to the point where it's hyperbolic. Cause yes, he's not probably the best singer, but the thing is, if you listen to some of those Swedish metal singers from the 1980s, some of them weren't always amazing. They were definitely trying to be more melodic than some of the new wave or British heavy metal singers for the most part, but at the same time, they weren't the best, but they were actually, I wouldn't really go as far to say they were the worst thing. He's just very high. He definitely does scream here and there because, again, he's trying to reach some of those notes because of the overall, to go along and overall with to go with the whole entire beat and the whole structuring of some of the songs. He's trying to hit some of those notes, but sometimes it may come off a little bit, a little scratchy. But I'm not gonna say he sounds like some sort of modern emo fucking singer or whatnot. I think that is, or pop punk, whatever fucking thing they wanted to just to complain about or just use sort of negatives. I know, I don't think that to me is going too far. He doesn't. He's far from it. I think that some people should change some of those opinions and really listen to some of those and go back and listen to a few of the Swedish metal bands from the 1980s just to recorrect their opinions. 'Cause I don't think he's a bad singer at all. It gets time to get used to, but when you do, he doesn't really ruin any of the songs. It's just different. I mean, most of the new wave for traditional heavy metal bands, so it may not always be the greatest singers, but it's at least the honesty, the sincerity, at least of the vote and just of them is what matters. And I think that there's at least a sincerity and an honesty from at least the guys here, where again, it's admirable, and I can't really fault them for that. Again, not everyone has to be Ronnie James Dio. Not everyone has to be Rob Halford. Not everyone has to be Bruce Dickinson. Not everyone has to be Ian Gillan or David Byrne of Uriah Heep. Not everyone has to be even King Diamond. Not everyone has to be. You're asking for too much to me. You're asking way too much. And of course, they go as far as to say not everyone can be Lou Gramm of Foreigner. Not everyone can be Dennis DeYoung of Styx or Michael Sweet from Stryper. You know, not everyone can be that talented of a singer, okay? Not everyone can be. So, the fact alone that they were able to get this band together, or just these two guys to get together and just play honestly, is I think is enough for being admission, okay? It's enough where I can at least admire it. So that's why. So it's definitely not bad. Good stuff all around. I think that it's a good, solid effort from these guys. So there you go. There is my thoughts on Colony from Starscape and my rating. It's a 8.21 out of 10. Again, the reason I'm going that high is because of for the way I admire what they're able to at least to come up with this album. I respect it. I find it's very honest. They definitely don't seem to shy away that they're not the most skilled musician, even though they're great. They're not bad. They've got some interesting ideas, and they want to try and take things and expand things a little bit further, even if it is basically basing their off of old sort of concepts, but they're trying to blend it in a way where it at least sounds unique and different, but without trying to be overly too trying to be out there because of it. Or I guess the only way to be original is if you're doing something fucking different. Fuck that. I think that's an absolute excuse just to trash a band. Okay, it's absolute bullshit. So I really think these guys are definitely interesting. They're good. I like them. So with that, I think that they did a good job. So if this sounds like something that would be up your alley, I'm going to leave you a link to their Bandcamp page where you can support and purchase this album and listen to it again, just to see if it is up your alley. So with that, hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.